Hey, welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm HamRadioDude. Thanks for checking out the channel. Today, I want to talk about the Baofeng GT-5R. This is a dual-band radio that was sent to me by Radioddity for evaluation or overview purposes. We're going to go through some of the features on this radio, talk about what makes it a little bit more unique than a UV5R, talk about price, specifications, and we'll hook it up to a spectrum analyzer to see how this thing operates under a spectrum analyzer, or to see if it passes all the emission standards. With that being said, I just really quickly want to mention, I don't care what you think about a radio being made in China. Yes, this radio is made in China. Your comments about Chinese garbage, electronics, and everything don't make any sense because you're typing on a laptop or a phone or some sort of device made in China. I'm just saying, guys, it doesn't make any sense unless you all have some, miraculously got a United States made laptop or desktop. I don't really care. With that, too, I'm not putting ICOM out of business. I'm not putting Yaesu out of business. I'm just here to make a video on a radio. Chill. Let's get started and talk about the Baofeng GT-5R.
Your source for amateur radio news, reviews, and tech overviews. This is HamRadioDude.
If I go to the Radioddity website and I take a look here at the Baofeng GT-5R, it says it's a 5-watt dual-band radio, upgraded legal version of the UV5R. I seem to recall an episode recently that Smoking Ape did on the same radio where his was advertised as 4 watts. So I did check the manual, and the manual also says it's a 5-watt radio. We're going to test that a little bit later just to see kind of what's going on. So it says Baofeng GT-5R 5-watt dual-band radio. And actually, let's be realistic here. 5 watts versus 4 watts, is it going to make the difference or the world a difference? Probably not. Anyway, here we go. So it says this is the difference between the UV5R and the GT5R. This is an upgraded legal version of the UV5R. Simply what that means is you need a license to operate this radio, and it's not going to be able to operate out of band. So you can't have somebody using this on the police frequencies or fire frequencies to transmit. You could still receive on there, but you won't be able to transmit on there. So this makes it legal. It's only active within the amateur radio bands. And what do I mean by amateur radio bands? Well, it's going to be 144 megahertz to 148 megahertz, or 2 meters, and then 70 centimeters, or 420 megahertz to 450 megahertz. And that's what this radio is going to be good for. It's only $24.99, so it's about the same price as the Baofeng UV5R. Again, the exception is you actually have one that isn't able to transmit on multiple bands. Now, there's going to be people who don't like that, and hey, man, all to you, whatever. But there's also those people out there who don't like the fact that it is capable of transmitting out of band. And this is your solution. This is 100% your solution right here. So, who would actually buy one of these Baofeng UV5Rs or GT5Rs, if you will? Let's talk about it. It says it here too. Better choice for the entry level. Perfect for somebody entry level who is worried that they may accidentally transmit out of band. But it's also something that maybe you want this in a go bag or as a backup radio, or maybe you're doing an event for a marathon run and you don't want to bring a very expensive radio out. Hey, this radio could work for just about anybody as a backup radio, or really even as a primary radio. Here we are on the table with the GT5R, and I have the radio on at the moment. I'm going to turn it off. I just wanted to mention that when you get the radio, the battery or the belt clip does not come installed on the radio. That's standard with Baofeng radios. What happens is either does the battery's not installed either. So if you want to install the belt clip, the first thing you do before actually putting the battery on is you're going to want to put the belt clip somewhere right around here. And these 2 screws that you see here are already on the radio. Unscrew them while holding this belt clip into place over the holes. You could then screw these 2 screws back into place. Puts the belt clip on the radio and actually avoids it from the battery too. Now go ahead and hold this little belt clip up to put the battery on. There's 2 little rails on the side and 2 rails on the side of the battery itself as well. And it almost acts as a guide, and you should hear it click audibly into place. So you have your belt clip installed and you have your battery installed. You're going to also need to install your antenna. Now, the antenna is an SMA female. And what does that mean? Well, if you look here, you could see that this is a SMA female. And what that means is instead of it being a pin sticking out, there's a little hole that goes here. The pin sticking out is actually going to be on the radio side, and that makes this an SMA male. All you're going to need to do is screw the antenna into the portion of the radio for the antenna. And as you screw it in, it's going to get to a point where it becomes a little bit stiff or tight. Don't over tighten this, but make sure that it is pretty snug. You have your antenna installed, you have your battery installed, you have your radio clip installed. And if you turn on the radio, you're going to notice something. If you've never seen a Baofeng radio before, it might be new to you, but this is the same kind of layout as the UV5R because this is a UV5R just with frequencies locked, as we can see by the FCC ID, which shows it's a UV5R. I'll have more on that FCC thing in just a few moments. You could switch in between VFO mode and channel mode or memory mode by hitting this button. In channel mode, this radio has 2 channels already pre-installed. Channel 127, which is 435.725, and channel 0, which is 144.725. Of course, you're going to want to program your own frequencies into here, such as repeaters and simplex frequencies and all that good stuff. There's a lot of videos out there for that already. But you can switch between VFO mode and memory mode again by hitting this button here. As you can see, I have a low power setting right now. It's indicated by the L that's on the screen. You could go into the menu and change quite a few things, and let's just take a look at the menu here real briefly. The button that says menu on the radio, when you click it, you start with option 0 or menu item 0, which is the squelch. You could use the page up and down arrows to go through and change things like the step and the TX power. So the TX power is currently set to low. And at this point now, if I hit menu again, I go down where the arrow shows here into the menu, and then I can hit up and down to change between high and low power. Let's go ahead and test this antenna real quick and just check what the standing wave ratio is, and then we're going to see if this thing is actually putting out 5 watts. I almost forgot, if you want to save it when it's on high power, go ahead then and hit the menu button again. It confirms it and it goes back to the TX power, and from there you could go ahead and switch through the rest of your options and change things like your wideband, or you could set a CTCSS tone and so forth. Again, there's a lot of videos out on there. I want to briefly talk about the standing wave ratio and kind of give you my idea of the actual numbers versus what you're going to see and explain why. So what I'm going to do here is, I just want to mention that 148 megahertz, I was at a 1.72 standing wave ratio, and it's kind of jumping back and forth to that right now. The difference here is now I am near a lot of electronics, and I'm not completely vertical, with my actual antenna. So the standing wave ratio is going to be skewed. If I continue to go down the band, you're going to see the 1.72 standing wave ratio, and those numbers didn't fluctuate much. And I can assure you that when I was out in the open field, they also didn't fluctuate much. However, in an open field, when I got to 144 megahertz, my standing wave ratio was about 2.9 to 1 standing SWR. What I want to show you too real quick is in an open field, the impedance values were about 55 ohms, 50 to 55 ohms. Whereas here under the electronics and not at a completely vertical position, they're a little bit more skewed. However, 50 to 55 ohms is what I was seeing on this antenna. I wanted to explain that to you, but also give you a little bit of a graph of what I'm seeing, just to kind of explain that, yes, electronics and all sorts of radio frequency interference could affect your standing wave ratio of your actual antenna. Next up, I want to take a look at the power output on this radio. And I want to mention that I'm using the diamond antenna meter, which is the model SX40C. It is capable and rated for 144 megahertz through 470 megahertz. I was using a Surecom SF20 meter earlier, and even though it seemed to be working, there was some really off results on UHF. I later was able to confirm that my SF20, which is a very inexpensive meter, had went faulty. So I'm using this diamond antenna meter. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you 4 different readings. The first reading is going to be on VHF low power. And when I transmit on VHF low power into a dummy load, yeah, that looks just under 2 watts, maybe 1.5 watts. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this to high power on VHF. And there we are at 5 watts, just as this radio is advertised. I'm now going to go ahead and go into the UHF band. And I'm operating low power. We're right at a watt. Now, if I go ahead and I bump that up to high power, we are somewhere around 4.5 watts, which on a 5-watt radio, that's in my eyes, that's completely fine. So I did want to go ahead and just give you an idea of the power rating or the power output on this Baofeng GT-5R. Everything seems to be essentially pretty par. And if you're worried about a half a watt, the difference is very minimal anyway. You'd be better getting a better antenna system for your radio. Before I actually hook this up to a spectrum analyzer, I want to mention that Dave Kassler a few months ago did a video on the GT-5R. He's done this already. Dave is way smarter of a guy than I will ever be. I will openly admit it because that's the truth. Dave found and compared the UV5R to the GT5R, and his findings on the GT5R are very similar to my findings. I'm going to go ahead and throw up what I found on the spectrum analyzer here so you could see, but again, they are very similar to Dave's findings, meaning the spectrum purity is a lot better with the GT5R than it has been with the UV5R. Dave also went on to mention in that episode that the FCC ID didn't really match the model, meaning the GT5R. The FCC ID was for UV5R, and even though they're essentially the same radio, I do believe that he is correct in the sense that it needs to have a different FCC ID in order for it to be a compliant radio. That also being said, I did check the FCC database, and it doesn't look like that FCC ID refers to the GT5R as a compatible model for that FCC ID. So just take that into consideration. However, we have seen the spectrum. We've seen that it's actually 5 watts. The antenna doesn't look too bad for what it is. Let's just go ahead really quick and jump into Chirp and see if there's anything in Chirp that we need to be made aware of. Now, I am using a programming cable that I had laying around the house, so hopefully it works. Okay, so I actually did, like I mentioned, find a programming cable, and it took a while because it's completely unlabeled, but this one is going to be sufficient for what we're doing. And I want to just show you real quick. I'll go ahead and I'll plug it in. I do have other videos on this as well, by the way, but I think it's kind of important because if it is your first time getting a Baofeng radio, you might want to make sure that you're getting the correct programming cable. And don't just buy like a cheap one on Amazon because it was $3 cheaper or whatever. Make sure you're getting the correct one. As I plug it in and I turn it on here, I'm going to be able to go to COM ports here in my device manager. And as you can see here, it's a prolific USB to serial COM port. And that's what you want for the Baofeng radios. There are other drivers out there for other chipset types, essentially. But if you have the wrong programming cable or the wrong chipset type, it might not work on your computer. I understand that might not be the case with Linux, though. However, I'm talking about Windows today. And anyway, so now that I have it plugged in, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to radio, and I'm downloading from radio. This is the first time I've done this, so we'll see if it works. I'm already set to COM3, and I'm going to go to my radio as Baofeng, and I'm assuming that I'm going to use the GT5R that's just right there. Let's go ahead in a minute and read it and see as a UV5R if it'll read as well. So it says to turn off the radio, do a bunch of stuff. I'm going to click OK, and it's cloning it already. So we should be able to now see that this radio reads fine in Chirp. It should write fine in Chirp as well. And there it is. Channel 0, as we mentioned, or memory channel 0 is 144.725. And then 127 is 435.725, as you could see. Now, I can go ahead and I could add things right here. You can see it says memory is out of range. That's because I double-clicked on it. Let's see if I could do that again and type in something. There we go. And I could actually change things like the power settings and a few other things as well. But then all I would have to do, really, at this point, I could also click on settings here, and just let's get an idea here of what settings we can change. Though this is nothing new with any kind of Baofeng radio, I'm actually kind of looking to see if there's something there that maybe allows me to open this up. Power on, message, welcome. You know, you could change that to your call sign if you wanted to. power on message, and so forth. There's just, okay, so here is a limit. Let's just see for fun if we could make the GT-5R unlock those limits, essentially. And actually, I should not have disabled these enable transmit buttons. So I went ahead and I re-enabled them, and let me rewrite to the radio. No, don't download. Rewrite to the radio here. And now as I'm uploading to the radio, I'm essentially trying to expand the limits of this radio. So we're talking about how this is a fully legal radio. And I'm not saying that you would want to by any means, especially because you just bought a radio that's locked for the amateur radio bands. But in a die-hard situation, you might need to unlock it. I'm not one to judge. Either way, it's up to you. But here we are, we're cloning it now, and I can confirm that the VHF-TX enable, if you disable that and the UHF disabled, this won't transmit. So maybe you want to give this to somebody who's getting ready to get licensed and they don't know how to program their radio via chirp. You could actually disable the transmit so they could listen without transmitting while they're not licensed. And what I just mentioned to you was I went ahead and I tried to do this unlock of these frequencies. So can you actually just unlock this and then be non-compliant for whatever reason? For example, now that I programmed it, let's go ahead and just go to a frequency. I'm so confident it's not going to work that 150. Yeah. And if I try to transmit on a frequency that is not in the system, it still locks you out. So you cannot transmit even if you change these upper and lower limits, which is great, That way you have a radio that's completely legal. Again, VHF-TX enable and UHF-TX enable, if you uncheck those after you program the radio, you can give it to somebody who's still learning and they can listen without transmitting, which is great. And I just want to spell this out here when I conclude this whole episode that with what I just said, that means that if you're not licensed in amateur radio or you don't plan on getting licensed, hey, that's cool, man. However, this radio is not for you because it's really not going to serve you much of a purpose. If you're looking to get this to use it for whatever frequencies you're planning on using it for, it's just not going to work. Which kind of leads up to my next point. We have pretty much seen since these radios came out that there's been many complaints about these radios. I do remember a lot of complaints always being about how dirty it was. It's very, on the spectrum purity, it was just all over the place. Well, you could see that every model and every year that comes out, these radios are vastly improving. To me, I think that that's a good sign that this radio is getting better, it's improving, which is great. Then there's people who, I don't want to say complain, but their main issue with the radio is that it transmits out of band. That issue's been resolved. It's been resolved, so there's no longer an issue there. People will always complain about where the radio's made. And, again, all I can say is throw away your TV, throw away your laptop, throw away all your electronics at home. That's just the way it is. I'm sorry I can't do anything about that. The radio's $24.99. Think about that for just a moment. You go out on a weekend and have 5 beers at a bar. I don't know how much beers cost at a bar, but I would assume it's got to be $24.99 at least, right? $25? $5 a beer? I don't know. I will tell you 2 packs of cigarettes in the city of Chicago is more expensive than buying this radio. All I'm getting at is this is a decent radio to throw in a backpack and have laying around, or maybe you're going to go to a campfire or you're going to go on vacation somewhere where, hey, if you lose the radio for $24.99, no big deal. I will also say that the programming cable on Radioddity's website, it is approximately $7.99 or $8. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to link it all below. If you're interested in the UV5R, but you want to remain more legal or more compliant, check out this radio. Anyway, I'm Ham Radio Dude. Thanks for checking out my channel. If you did like what you saw, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, hit the dislike button. And, I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot for all your support. 73. Hey, I know I said 73, and in the amateur radio community, that's like, hey, I'm done. But, I always come back and I say something. I wanted to give a big shout out to Radioddity. Thank you so much for sponsoring this video and sending me a radio to be able to take a look at and evaluate. I greatly appreciate it. If you ever need anything else, please just let me know. With that also being said, I want to give a huge shout out to all my channel supporters, which this month was the first month I actually activated channel supporters, and I got quite a few. So I'm going to give a shout out to the operator statuses here. Thank you to James Linden. Thank you to Dan M0IDW, Plasma Storm 73KY4IF. Thank you very much to Jason N3YAZ. I appreciate you, Don N5SKT. I really do. And FEPLabs Radio, Jim, thank you so much. Kevin WQ9F, Ham Radio, thanks so much. HamWorldOnline, thank you as well. Now, a lot of those guys actually have channels of their own. I'll go ahead and I'll link them below on my YouTube description here. There are a few Cup of Coffee members, and I really greatly appreciate you guys as well. However, that should be 73. Until next time.